Hi, everyone. Hope you're well. Please just give me a thumbs up if you can hear me properly. Perfect. Thank you. I'm not going to wait any longer. I'm going to start, and whoever joins in a bit later can catch up because we have quite a bit that we need to cover in our 1 hour session today. So, firstly, I'm going to go over Learning Unit 4, Theme 1 and Theme 2 today. I'm going to try and push that at least within the first 40 minutes of the session. And then in the last 20 minutes, I want to go over sort of your assignment 1, PACER, because I do know that that's due on Monday. So I don't want to leave you without going through any sort of like from a support perspective. So we got quite a bit that we need to cover today. So I'm going to just start. Just going to share my screen quickly. Okay. So I'm hoping everyone can see this. Okay. So today, as I mentioned, we're going to be going over Learning Unit 4, Theme 1, Theme 2, where the focus is predominantly around forecasting. Forecasting over the last, I would say, 3 semesters, with this specific module has come out in an assignment and also in an examination. I do know forecasting is part of your assignment. I think it's your essay question, if I'm not mistaken. So I would just want to go through some of the theory around it. We're not going to obviously have a lot of time to go over too much in depth, but as long as you have the basic covering of it, and then we'll go over the assignment question just so you have a little bit more of an understanding as well. Okay, so the first thing we want to understand is what is forecasting specifically. So when we talk about forecasting, we want to be able to sort of think towards the future and make sort of predictions. And how we're going to do that is by using historical data. So data that probably you would go over like a 3 or a 5 year span. And you do some sort of data analysis around it, where it'll now predict how much of volume or how much you should be expecting in the current term. So a lot of times forecasting is used, especially from a production perspective. So you can predict what your supply is going to be based on the demand of the previous year. You can also use it from an inventory management perspective so that you can understand how much of stock you should be carrying on hand, how much of buffering stock or safety stock you require as well. And also from a budgeting and decision making, a lot of times what happens is, especially from a corporate business side, when you go into doing budgets and targets for the next financial year, you use the current financial and the previous financial year to understand what your forecast is going to be. A lot of times businesses put a whether it's a 10% growth or a 20% growth on current situation, and that's how they would forecast what their potential target is or their potential budget is going to be. A lot of customers that are, let's say, in like the retail sector, they put different forecasts based on seasonalities, also based on holiday periods. So where they know that there's more foot traffic, that's where they would now forecast a little bit higher than in general. So speaking from a logistics perspective, peak period generally hits around about October, November, December. That's when people now start shopping like crazy online, and Black Friday hits, and your seasonality of Christmas and New Year's, etc. So how we would plan our forecast specifically is we would use the previous financial year, so your October, November, your previous quarter. We would use that term, and then we put in based on what our customers' forecast is going to be on their peak period. We would use that similar percentage, and we would then predict from there how much of resources we require, how much of extra vehicles you would require, um, equipment, technology, etc. So that's how forecasting would work, and forecasting has a role to play in every single industry. It's not predominantly in logistics, but it's also from a production perspective, a manufacturing perspective, and it deals with um, every industry, whether it's retail or automotive, um, uh, fashion, etc. So while we're on the forecasting topic, I want to just do a quick sort of example for you, just so that you have a little bit more of an understanding of how forecasting would work, especially using the different trends of like historical data, different analysis, etc. So an example that I have here is a winter jacket company. So let's call it XYZ Clothing. This specific company would sell winter jackets, and they basically want to predict how much of jackets that they're going to be selling in like an upcoming winter season. So they have to use historical data, they have to use different market trends, and any sort of external factor that can be used to create a different forecast. So the historical data analysis is basically where the business itself looks at sales data from the past, let's say 4 or 5 winters, and shows, whether it shows steady growth in sales each year because you now have colder winters. Also, probably the company has decided that they're increasing their marketing efforts. So they're looking at an average growth, let's say, of 10%. The different market trends is they want to analyze sort of broader market trends. So you want to first understand that there is an increase in a demand for specific product, but they also probably want to look at doing something that's more sustainable, maybe something that's more eco-friendly, so that you can attract a new sort of customer line or a new target market specifically. And then from an external perspective, they want to look at forecasting from a weather perspective, because if it's a colder than normal winter, then you're going to expect a higher demand. So these are sort of the different sort of terminologies that's used and the different aspects that you would look at when you're analyzing your forecast. It's not just as easy as historic data plus 10% or historic data plus 20%. It's looking at the different market trends. Maybe there's a need for a different sustainable product in your target line. Maybe there's a need for your product more from a demand perspective because externally something has shifted. Whether it was, it got colder, so people were looking for more winter jackets. That's sort of the external factors that you would specifically be looking at. Okay, so then when you're looking at doing a forecast specifically, there's obviously different methods that you would then use. And I mean, we're going to go through some of the methods, and you'll see that it's common stuff that we would be going through throughout the semester whenever we discover forecasting. And it's either something that we call qualitative or it's something we call quantitative. Okay. So the different types of forecasting specifically is, number one, we want to look at something called the time series forecasting. And let me tell you, this is probably one of the most common forecasting types that you would come across, when you're working with forecasting, because in terms of time series, they're looking at from a moving average, looking at past data over a specific period, any sort of fluctuations, any longer term market trends, etc. So time series is something that's more commonly used than anything else. And time series specifically falls under what we call quantitative forecasting. And quantitative forecasting is where we're using data to physically analyze it. So you'll see the difference between, and it's here with time series as quantitative, and qualitative being the complete opposite, which is you're looking at different methods like a Delphi method where you're gathering opinions from people within the marketplace, to reach a forecast, or you're doing different market research like surveys and interviews and focus groups to discover some sort of future consumer trend, or you're building different scenarios and different outcome. So how I like to remember it specifically is qualitative is more of your speaking to people, doing interviews, doing surveys, etc. And quantitative is using data analytically to get where your forecast needs it to be. Okay, so we've got quantitative, which is numbers, okay, quantitative, and qualitative, which is more from a research perspective, okay. And that's how you would remember if you're planning on going any further from a studies perspective and you have to do a thesis at some point, you're always expected to do some sort of research methodology. And with research methodology comes both these two types of forecasting, number one being quantitative and number two being qualitative. And you have to use the various methods in there to understand. So between the both qualitative and quantitative is something what we call hybrid. Okay, and I know I'm sort of deflecting a little bit from here, but I think it's nice to understand holistically. It's something called hybrid, where it's a mix of the two. And you can use data in order to get to where your result needs it to be. And you can use interviews and surveys to get it to where your results need to be. So a lot of times from a thesis perspective, they would always push you to understand from a market side, speaking to the different experts in that specific industry, how things are generally working. Okay, so that's time series and quantitative, and then it's qualitative. Then we have causal and econometric forecasting, which is more of a regression analysis where you use different relationships between something that's a dependent and an independent variable. Like, for instance, if you want to understand what your sales forecast is going to be, you're going to base it on what your advertising spend is. Okay, so using an independent over a dependent. And then you have other stuff like multiple regression and structural sort of modeling from an equation perspective. These are just concepts that fall under something that we call causal forecasting, all right? And I want you to go and read up on all of these different types of forecasting. These always come in from a secondary perspective, but the two main portions that you need to understand is quantitative, qualitative, okay? I think I've said it enough already. Then we have judgmental forecasting, which is also from an expert opinion, which would fall under your qualitative portion of it, where you rely on the different knowledge, your different experiences from people within the industry that would make any sort of prediction. A lot of the times the predictions are based on history, so what they've seen over the last 5 years or 10 years in the specific industry. And sometimes if they're not, if that sort of historic data is limited, they make predictions based on what they've seen right now, right? And then financial forecasting, which is more from a budgeting perspective and a profit forecasting perspective. So with a budget, you want to be able to predict what your future sort of financial performance is going to be, whether it's a revenue budget, an expense or your cost budget, or your cash flow budget, or your sales budget, whatever that is going to be within your specific business. And you do this by using historic data majority of the time. And then profit forecasting is predicting what the future profit is going to be based on what your revenue and your sales is compared to what your cost is going to be. So when you're sitting in a corporate setting, financial forecasting is absolutely important, especially if you own a portion of an income statement. Budgeting and profit forecasting is absolutely important. You set that up way before the new financial year starts. You basically have to be held accountable to that specific number. A lot of times what businesses try to do is they have a company budget or a holistic budget for the holding company. And they just sort of say, okay, this is yours is X, yours is Y, yours is Z, and you have no choice but to take it. But a lot of times what happens is there's a lot of mathematics that go into it. A lot of times people put in their budget forecasting based on how many heads you're carrying in your business, which is realistically not the right way. But if it's sales heads, you tend to use what their cost to company is going to be multiplied by the number of months. You're putting in something that's more structured. Okay, so that's your types of forecasting. Okay. Then we want to spend a little bit more time on something called, obviously, time horizon. And there's 3 different categories of it, okay? Number 1 is what we call a short range horizon. And this is basically anything from whether it's a few days or a few weeks to basically about 12 months, I would say up until a year, where your short range forecast is used for planning anything from a purchasing perspective, whether it's, you're scheduling jobs, any way that you can measure your staff or your labor, your workforce, and what's your correct levels of production needed to be. So basically, in the short term specifically, you want to forecast the time that's required to prepare for, let's say, for instance, it's in your case from a student perspective. In the short term, you want to be able to forecast how much of time you need to prepare for an assignment or how much time you need to prepare for an examination or a test. Okay. Then medium range is anything between like a year to 5 years specifically. And this is more where you are planning a sales strategy, right? Any big scale production plans, capacity plans, whether there's an expansion, and then understanding where your cash budget is sitting. And if I have to use it from a student perspective, it's where you're forecasting anything from a monetary requirement. Maybe it is your fees that you need for the duration of your study. And then long-term range is like from 5 years upwards. You want to be able to understand from a long-range horizon specifically. You want to forecast what you're going to achieve after you've completed, your specific degree or diploma or whatever it is. And from a business perspective, it's how can you use that 5 years? Are you planning a new product line? Maybe you want to go something more sustainable. Maybe it's more eco-friendly. Maybe it's new capital expansion projects. Maybe you want to open up a new location or different branches. Anything from a research and development and an expansion perspective is what you would generally see in a long range. No business wakes up today and decides in a month's time, I'm opening an office in Johannesburg, Pretoria, and in Mpumalanga. That is something that's planned and thought about and budgeted for over a medium to long range perspective. So that's just from a timing side, exactly where your forecast should be sitting, whether it's a short term, medium term, or a long term. Okay. All right. Then we have the different from an accurate forecasting perspective, okay? A lot of times businesses ask the question, why do they need something that's an accurate forecast? And a lot of times the answer is because a lot of business decisions are made based on that forecast. If I am telling you I'm forecasting and predicting 100 million Rand worth of sales in the next financial year, I need the resources to handle that 100 million Rand sales, okay, whether it's now employing more drivers, customer services representatives, account managers, whatever the case must be. I must be able, if I'm forecasting it, I need to be able to make decisions that go with it. And basically, there's a lot of things that go in when you are planning a forecast. It has to be as accurate as possible. So the first one is you want to be able to use something that is simple and it's easy to use, okay? A lot of times when you're using different forecasting tools, if it's too complicated and too sophisticated, the person who is forced to use that forecast and that budget is not very confident in using it. Therefore, it needs to be simple for everybody to understand, etc. It should also be sort of from a a cost-effective perspective, where the benefit should always outweigh what the cost is going to be. So it shouldn't be something that is expensive, because forecasts do cost money, especially if you are outsourcing it and you're using a specific innovative tool to draft your forecast, then you are paying like a monthly requirement. If you're doing it in-house from a business perspective and you're using your historic data a lot, and that information is available to you, then 100% you can do it without it being costly at all. But if you are going the innovative and tech route, and you're probably a new startup business, and you haven't had any intent to go out to the market to survey and do market research and do the whole qualitative perspective, then it does become a lot more expensive to do it. You also want to make sure that, for instance, a lot of meaningfulness in terms of the units are now forecasted, and this is more from a production perspective. So when a department like a finance head does a forecast, everyone should know how much is what is part of it. So the exact rand value, for instance, you know, exactly what should be, what is available to spend, basically, from a budgeting perspective, so that they know how much is available. When they know how much is available to spend, they'll know how much is available to produce as well. Okay. Also should be on time. It should be very reliable. So it should be something that should work every single day. So using the same technique, it gives you the same accurate forecast. You basically will have everyone's buy-in when that does happen. And also forecast should be in writing. So everyone should be aware of what it is. No one should believe that because of forecast is not in writing, or, when it is in writing, it's basically universal for everybody. So yeah, that's basically the different sort of, when we talk of accuracy with the forecast, there's a lot of benefits to it. Imagine you budgeting towards getting a target of X amount and you don't know about it, you don't know how you're going to get there. So the forecast will be a complete plan of how you're going to get there at some point. Okay. Then we go on to the steps to prepare the forecast, and pay attention to this because at some point it does come out, right? So when we're looking at the different steps, when it comes to preparing a specific forecast, you firstly need to understand what is the purpose of the forecast, right? How will the forecast be used? What will it be used for? Who will use it? When you're going to use it, etc. And what level is a forecast now developed for? Is it developed for mid-tier management to top management, or is it developed from every employee within your business perspective? Okay. Because then you have a better understanding of how the forecast should be developed. Then you need to find the correct time horizon. So choose which time, whether it's short, medium, long term. And then you can understand how much you need to push the forecast. Then understand what technique you're using. Is it a qualitative technique? Is it a quantitative technique? Is it a hybrid technique? What methods are you then using? Is it Delphi? Is it time series, etc.? Gather your information, analyze your data, whether it's from a qualitative perspective, you're going out and getting surveys done, or quantitative, using historic data from a time series. Understand how you're going to gather all of this information. Then you're going to make the forecast. So you need to find, obviously, the suitable method that works for you and for your business, depending on what data is available, what type of product you want to sell, or what type of service you want to give, or what is the demand for your specific product. All of this needs to be chosen for the purpose specifically. And then lastly, you want to be able to consistently and continuously monitor the forecast. So the forecast needs to be measured at all times so that everybody is now compliant with it, whether it is from a cost perspective and we're looking at budgets, or whether it's from a sales perspective and you're looking at revenue. If the actual performance is not in accordance with the forecast, then there needs to be some sort of investigation, any corrective measure. All of this needs to happen fairly quickly. And what does help is that you're very proactive to the forecast. You're now not reactive where you are only looking at the forecast the day you develop it. So at step one, and then you're looking at it at the end of the financial year when your 12 months is already gone past, so you are proactive and not reactive. And you can test, whether how close your actual data is to that historic data, to that forecasted data. So you can make changes, and you also know when you're developing your next forecast, what sort of the measurements you need in order for you to go forward. Okay, we're almost at the end of this learning unit, and then we'll move on to the assignment, right? Then we want to go over some of your situational factors, right? So a lot of times what happens is a single sort of one forecast specifically doesn't always work for every business and every situation. So you now have different characteristics, you have different strengths, you have different weaknesses, and different forecasting methods that you now need to use for different scenarios. Okay. So you'll have one forecast that may work for your entire business, or you may have multiple forecasts that works for various departments within your business, right? So basically what we're going to look at is the different types, and I'll go over it. And the first one is accuracy and cost, right? So there has to always be a correct sort of type or a technique that's used when you're doing your forecast, because it needs to be as accurate as possible. If you need a high accuracy level, then there's a lot more cost that's now going into play, because you need a large amount of information and a large amount of data in order for you to make sure that all of your statistical methods are being used, all of your tools from a interview perspective is being used. So the higher the accuracy, the higher the cost, which means that you are now looking at more of an innovative or a technical tool in order for you to get the information that you require, whether it is getting outside parties to do interviews for expert opinions or historical data from the industry or from the market. Then the availability of data. So before you even choose what sort of forecasting method you want to use, you need to also understand what information is available to you. So whether you are going the outsourced route, you need to also know from a quantitative perspective, you need a lot of information from a data side, where there's a lot of different techniques, there's a lot of different calculations and mathematics that go into it. And on the other side, if you're going from a qualitative perspective, then you need customer surveys, you need information from customers or potential customers. So you need to always understand what is available in the market before you proceed to choose what sort of type of forecasting you're going to go forward with. Then you're going to understand from the time span perspective, so what sort of method you're now choosing. You need to understand what the influence of that forecast is going to be and the time that's available to collect that information or that forecasting, that qualitative or qualitative portion of it. Okay. Nature of goods and services to be forecast. So the method that best suits a lot of products, each of it should be used from that perspective. So a different method for a different sort of product can be used. So one product may use more quantitative, another product more qualitative. So the various factors that influence, at what stage your forecast is going to be, what's the seasonalities, etc. Changes in the market. So any sort of changes that's anticipated in the market directly will impact a forecast. As we saw when we did the winter jacket example, if your winter is a lot colder, then people would now buy more winter jackets. So it's completely based on a lot of times market changes, market trends, external factors, all of those ranges. And then use of from a decision factors perspective. It's now making sure that everybody that is a stakeholder within the organization has a say in what different types of forecasts to be used and what types and methodology that should be used as well. Okay. So this is obviously completely theoretical. So I would suggest that you go and, look at your textbook and go through that, or you can just read, go over these slides to understand a little bit more. So forecasting can be very ineffective if we don't use the correct forecasting tool. Number one, we want to make sure that we are ticking all the boxes when it comes to the type of product, the type of service we want to do, and how we now forecasting this, strategically. What sort of information and data are we using in order for us to understand what our final forecasting or forecast will look like. Then we have management failure. And from a management failure, it's basically where a lot of times business fails to understand that forecasting is a huge part of any business. I mean, imagine you walk into a business and you don't know what your sales target is. You don't know what your budget is. You haven't given an indication of what your cash flow should be. So if business doesn't share this sort of information to the various departments that hold their own forecasts, unfortunately, there's no point in having a forecast at all. Failure to monitor the accuracy. So how we had done the 6 steps previously, if you don't follow step 6, and you don't monitor how accurate that forecast is going to be, then the business cannot improve the forecast. And you are now sitting in a reactive space where you cannot change anything because it's broken, and you've now surpassed the time of where it can be fixed. You now have to start all over again and choose another forecast or redevelop the forecast that you have and re-implement it to business. Then a lot of times businesses fail to involve the relevant people or the right people when they're setting the forecast. So if you're setting it as an individual perspective, it's not going to work. You need an entire team, whether you're sitting in a corporate institution where you've got a CEO, an MD, a branch manager, sales manager, after sales manager, finance, HR, accounting, creditors, debtors, IT. So everybody, operations, production, manufacturing, everybody now needs to come around the table to have a part and be a stakeholder in that specific forecast, because a lot of times what happens in business, especially at the lower level, business doesn't understand, nor do they recognize. So it's always nice to get the opinions of everybody when you are developing that specific forecast. Then we have failure to recognize from the beginning that the forecast can be wrong. So a lot of times, trial and error, businesses forecast, incorrectly. They might forecast a specific amount from a raw material side that you required in order for you to make a finished product. So the correct method would be to forecast the requirements for the finished product. So if you are making 10 rulers, for instance, then you need 200 kgs of plastic, 10 liters of ink, whatever the case may be. So you need to now go backwards, first talk about how much of finished product you need, and then work your way backwards in terms of forecasting what your raw materials are going to be for that specific item. And then it's also forecasting incorrectly. So very similarly, you want to make sure that you get the correct items at the beginning and not at the end. If you forecast an error, the longer the forecast period, the bigger your error then becomes, right? So you need to be absolutely realistic when you are forecasting items, and it needs to be correct right from the onset. Okay. Is there any questions so far when we come to forecasting? I think you'll gain a little bit more momentum when we go over the sort of pacer, and then we can take it from there. Is there any questions? Okay. So let me share the pacer quickly. So I'm going to have all of these things, all of these resources posted tonight for you. So you have and understanding. Okay. Okay, so here's our PACER. And I'm going to share this on my screen, okay, but I'm going to read the questions from your assignment specifically, all right? So just keep in my motion if you can understand what I'm saying. Okay, so question one. Firstly, let's start right at the beginning. Your complete assignment. Am I losing anybody? Is everybody here and can see my screen and can hear me properly? Thumbs up. Okay, cool. Perfect. All right. So firstly, your assignment one is based off 100 marks, right? And the due date is the 1st of September at 23:59 p.m. Number one, please make sure you are submitting way before that. Number two, because there can be a lot of technical issues. Number two, referencing. That's all I got to say about that. And question three, please make sure, and this is in relation to referencing as well, make sure your Turnitin percentage is not high. If you have a high Turnitin percentage, then you're going to have to go back and redo portions of where you're seeing plagiarism and having to reference it correctly, then having to resubmit. So if you're leaving your submission for sort of lastminute.com, unfortunately, you're not going to have enough time to now go back and make any changes, all right? I then will grade the last paper that you upload, right? So if you start uploading from 7 p.m. and then you have a problem and then there's 8, 9, 10, and 11 p.m., I will take the 11 p.m. submission. So the last submission is what I would take with that specific plagiarism score. All right. So let's start at the beginning, which is question one. And question one is based off 30 marks, right? So it is a short little case study based on a company called New Tech. I'm not going to obviously read the case study to you, but it's based off a company called New Tech. And there's 3 questions that coincides with this, right? So question 1.1 comes out from Learning Unit 1, Theme 3, Chapter 1, right? And the question is more specifically about that case study for New Tech and explain how the different functional groups like marketing, IT, customer services, all of that work together to manage operations effectively. And you need to provide examples of how these departments collaborate to ensure the successful production. So I'm obviously not here to give you an answer, all right? But I'm here to guide you in a way that will help you in terms of understanding the marking rubric, because I think that's a lot of times where we fell short in our previous semester, is where everyone was not understanding the specific rubric correctly, and based on not understanding the rubric, you weren't giving the sufficient answer that was required in order for you to get full grading on that specific question, okay? So I just want to go into, just give me 1 second quickly. Just having a bit of a technical difficulty, but I'm almost there. Okay, so question 1.1. You now need to talk about the roles of the different functional groups, right? And then the collaboration between the departments. And then they ask you the question on the goods and service context. So it's explaining to you that you're getting 2 marks, 2 marks, and 1 mark. And you need to also ensure that you have an example. So make sure you're explaining the different roles or the goals of the business of the specific organization of New Tech, and understand how the different roles like marketing and all of that coincides with operations. Then how all these departments are going to collaborate between each other, whether it's like from a project management perspective or whatever it is, and then a goods and service context. you basically want to talk about, whether it is, and you have to use an example here, a different department like a marketing department or an IT department, etc. Okay, so I'm not here, I don't want to give you the answers, but it's just to give you a little bit of a better context. Then question 1.2 is list and explain the 3 stages of the transformation process in ops management. Discuss the difference between goods production and services production in the context of new tech solutions, and analyze how new tech applies the 3 stages of transformation to optimize the production of its goods and services. All right. So this is from Learning Unit 1, Theme 1 and 2, Chapter 1. And the marks already broken down for you. So number 1 is you need to list the 3 stages specifically. Now listen, it's telling you to list the 3 stages. You don't need to type an essay for listing the 3 stages, right? You just need to tell me what the 3 stages are. And then when we're talking about goods versus service production, and you need to make a reference to new tech specifically, you need to talk about the goods production first, and then the services production. And how I would do it is I would use, when you're talking about new tech, developing different software solutions to help businesses, maybe it's to streamline operations, etc. Whatever that answer is, you're going to probably get a mark for that and then a mark for an example. Then from a services perspective, it may be because they are a software company, maybe it's an after sales service. You're going to speak about that, what challenges they're addressing, and then an example. So that will give you 2 marks for goods, 2 marks for services, all right? And then 1 mark for new tech application, 1 mark for example, that's under goods, and then 1 mark for the services application for new tech, and 1 mark for an example. All right, so that's 4 marks specifically. Then for 3 marks, they're asking you to do an analysis, so how you can apply the 3 stages of transformation to optimize the production of its goods and services. So you now need to do an analysis from a new tech perspective. So you're going to use the 3 stages that you listed, and you're now going to break down the stages from a new tech perspective. Okay, and then you're going to get a mark per explanation per stage. So that's 3 marks in total. Okay, is there any questions so far? If you do have questions, just unmute yourself and ask me, okay, because my screen can't see who's putting their hand up. Okay, so assume you are fine up until 1.2. Then we go into 1.3, and that is for 15 marks, and this falls into Learning Unit 1, Theme 2, Chapter 1, right? And we're now talking about from a impact of globalization and the greater pressure on the organization to deliver. So that's obviously an insight. So you now need to discuss the economic change, the tech change, and the competition change as factors that influence the competitiveness of a business like new tech. So you can see a lot of it is now based on application. So it says here, very important, 1 mark award for the theory of each factor, and then 2 points required for each factor. All right. So you're firstly going to be talking about the economic change, and you're going to discover that obviously you're going to explain it from a theoretical perspective, and you're going to get 2 marks and 2 marks for application under economic change. That's 5 marks in total, 1 for theory and then 4 marks for application in essence. All right. So I would do an application and an example. That's why assignments are so important, where you need to look outside your textbook. You need to do additional research to understand what is happening out there from an economic change perspective. Maybe it's competition from different markets. Maybe it's specifically looking at emerging markets. Maybe it's a BRICS situation, where you can also look at imports, from a China and a India and a Vietnam, and where it's a little bit more inexpensive, you get economies of scale, better unit price, better landed cost, etc. Then you're going to look at competition, exact same thing, a mark for your theory, and then 4 marks from an application perspective, and technology changes as well. All right, so that'll give you a total of 15 marks. All right. Then we're going to go on to question 2, which now gives you your hydro equipment manufacturer case.
Hi, ma'am. I have a question for question 1.3, right? So, I wanted to ask because I haven't seen like the economic change or technology change or any of that in the textbook. So, are these things not in any specific part of the textbook, and we should do more additional resources like to search more outside of the textbook? So, any answer we get from outside the textbook is fine.
Yes. So as long as you reference it, okay, I don't mind you looking outside as long as from a theory perspective you understand what the economic tech and competition is from a theory perspective, and you're now going into application. Remember, your outside resources and referencing is where your application is going to come in. You're not going to wake up one day and understand that, where competition is sitting and then just dream about what an example is going to be or how you're going to apply this question. It has to come from reading and it has to come from research. So you're going to have to still look for outside sources. So if you didn't find it in the textbook, which is in the textbook, I think it's page like 63 or 64 or something like that. So just check around about there. And then you can use outside sources. I don't mind as long as it's referenced.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Sure, no problem. Okay, then let's go to question 2, and this is for 35 marks. So it's quite a long case study, and there's 4. Okay, I think I missed out something here. So there's 4 portions to it. Okay, I'll just fix this and I'll send it off to you. And the first question is 2.1. You need to analyze the process structures that was used to optimize services for the specific company, so hydro equipment manufacturer, and discuss how automation and standardization of processes contributed to service improvements. So use examples from finance and procurement functions to support your answer. So this is for 5 marks, all right? It's already telling you to use examples from a finance and procurement side. So number 1, you need to understand what is the functions of finance and procurement in order for it to help you to support your answer, right? So you need to talk about like your different optimized services, whether it's like a warehouse service, etc., where you have better workflows, better automation. So anything where you can standardize a process for the 2 functions, all right? So you're going to speak about it from that perspective, anything from a automation and standardization side. Wherever you can see automation and standardization in the case study, you need to bring that in here, and you need to link it to a finance and procurement as well. Okay, so that's for a total of 5 marks. If I go any more in depth, you are going to basically reference me in your assignment, right? So this is sitting in learning unit 3. Then question 2.2 is discuss how automation and standardization was used in the case study to create efficiency in your workflow. So you now need to isolate automation, right? And now say what automation is. So going away with manual processing, all of that. What is the WNS, etc. You want to speak about different systems that was used, and you're going to pull this out from the case study, all right? So for this specific part, automation, you're going to have 5 marks here. So explaining automation, number 1, you probably get like 1 mark, and then the balance of the 4 marks is going to be from the elements you're pulling out from the case study, all right? Then the second part of it is going to be standardization. Also the same thing. Number 1 is going to be what is the standardization, and then the 4 marks is going to be what you're going to pull out from the case study. Firstly, before you answer this question, understand what automation is and understand what standardization is. When you have those two understandings, when you're reading the case study, you would be able to pull out different extracts from there of what fits in where, and your puzzle will now be formed. Okay, I know right now it's probably I'm speaking, a different language to you, but I can tell you all this information is in the case study. You can very easily pull it out from there. All right. 2.3, it's discussing how the implementation of BPR, which is your business process reengineering, impacted the performance of the specific company. All right. So here it is for 10 marks. Yeah, it is 10 marks. So you're going to basically be implementing business process reengineering. So all of this is in Learning Unit 3 as well. You're going to be implementing a BPR to improve the performance of this hydro equipment manufacturer because you want to address different inefficiencies, you want to streamline it, etc., and you now need to put in some of the key impacts, right? And you'll find this information in your textbook. So for 10 marks, I would say probably you can do 2 to 3 of those key impacts. And then you need to, number one, understand what that first impact is, do a theoretical explanation, and then relate it to or relate that BPR to hydro equipment, right? So it should give you like 4 to 5 marks per impact, right? So I'm telling you do 3, but it may be 2 if you're doing enough so that you're getting 5 marks per, whether it's from efficiency or a reduction or whatever it is, you're getting 5 marks per topic, right? And you can do 2. And then you've got 2.4, which is you're also sitting in Learning Unit 4. So I'll just fix it here. I think I had a little bit of a moment there. And 2.4 is evaluating the role of process performance measurement in the hydro equipment manufacturing transition from manual to automated processes. Explain how key performance indicators such as runtime and throughput can be used to assess the success of a newly implemented system. All right. So it's already first for 10 marks, you firstly now need to understand what the role of the entire process is, or this, process performance measurement tool. You need to understand what their role is. And number 2, you now need to explain to me what is runtime, and you now need to do an application and then an example. And then you need to explain to me what is throughput. Give me the theory, give me the application and an example. So in total, you should be running at least 4 marks for runtime, 4 marks for throughput, and probably 2 marks for explaining to me what is the role of this process. Okay, so that will give you 10 in total. Then we move on to question 3. All right, and question 3 is our essay question. All right, so it's worth 35 marks, okay, which is quite a bit. And I'm gonna go through the question first, then I'm gonna go through the rubric, all right? So critically analyze how XYZ Electronics can enhance its forecasting process by integrated quantitative and qualitative forecasting techniques, considering the impact of the fourth industrial revolution. Your essay should focus on how the methods can improve strategic supply chain management and address the forecasting challenges. So when you get a question this big, please do not stress yourself out. You need to break it down into different segments, right? You can see it's already broken down in your rubric. So number 1, it's telling you that for your structure of your essay, your clarity of writing, whether you have logic, whether you have a flow, whether your tone is right, etc., you're getting 5 marks. So all I need is better sentence construction, I need proper spelling, and I need to understand what you're saying, and you're basically getting your marks here, all right? Then we're going into content for 23 marks. So how the rubric is broken down, it's already broken your question into the rubric where it'll tell you how many marks is required. So the first one is for 6 marks, analyze and apply forecasting techniques to XYZ electronics context, all right? So you now need to understand, remember when we're talking structure, sorry, I'm just going to go back to the first one. This is an essay, all right? You need to do an introduction. There needs to be the body where your content is going to be sitting, and there needs to be a closing or a conclusion. If you do not have that structure right, you're already starting on without 5 marks, right? So make sure that you are following the structure of an essay with an intro, body, and a conclusion. Then when you want to go into your specifics, like your different forecasting techniques, you want to understand or explain what is quantitative, what is qualitative, and explain to me all of the information that now falls within it, which I'm not going to go through with you right now. And then you're obviously going to put in your clear application of both qualitative and quantitative, whether it means you are doing a scene where you are explaining to me what is quantitative, what falls into quantitative, so the different forecasts like time series, etc., and then how this applies to XYZ. That's how you need to look at it completely. And then from a qualitative perspective, you need to explain to me what qualitative is. Maybe you're talking about the Delphi method, maybe it is consumer surveys, interviews for experts, etc. Explaining all of this to me and then doing an application for XYZ, okay? Then you're talking about the different challenges, all right? So it says here, consideration of the specific challenges that XYZ electronic faces in its forecasting process. And this is now for 9 marks. So you now need to read the case study and understand where their challenges are sitting, you know, whether it's they have too much of stock or whatever that answer is. Explain to me why. Why do you think so? And then obviously that is for 9 marks. So even if you give me 3 explanations, and this is challenge 1, 2, and 3, explaining the challenge and how is it related to XYZ, etc. Okay, then we're going to have substantiation of points. So basically, if your complete body specifically is done correctly and in a correct order, you do get points for that. And then 5 marks from an overall argument, where you're able to build an essay that speaks the right language, right? Meaning that you're bringing in the challenges, you're bringing in the different forecasts. It doesn't mean to say that you have it right, but you know the path that you're on, basically. So basically, this essay is giving you almost 12 marks for just making sure that you have a flow, you have an intro, body, and conclusion, you have good sentence construction, all of that, right? So that's like 12 marks that you're basically getting. And that basically takes us to the end of that assignment. So that's a total of 100 marks. Is there any questions? This is your time.
Evening, ma'am.
Yes, hello.
A quick question, ma'am. In terms of, a realistic length of the essay, like word count, I know we discussed it on the group at some point, but
Yeah.
I mean, what's like a realistic word count? Like, we don't want to go overboard or too short.
No, of course. I think what you do is obviously follow that assignment format that I gave you guys. I think it was at the beginning of the semester in terms of your font size, etc. And if you're working on a correct font size, I would say your assignment should be between 2 to 2.5, maybe 3 pages most. I don't want to go on word count. I'll give you on page volume, all right? So between 2 to 3 pages.
100%. Thank
You
you, ma'am.
should be fine. No problem.
100%.
No problem.
Thank you, ma'am. Have a good one.
Okay. You too. Any other questions, guys? I know this does look a little bit more difficult than what you guys had in semester 1, but I promise you, just follow my advice in terms of the marking rubric, how to set out your answers to those specific questions in terms of theory, applications, and examples, you'll be completely fine. Just if it's a 10 mark question, don't give me 2 lines because it's not going to be enough for me to mark. All right. Make sure you are following that marking rubric, which is a lot of issues that we had in the first semester. So follow my advice and I'm pretty sure you'll be in the right space. So after today, well, tonight, I will share with you the corrected PACER. I'll share with you our slides for Learning Unit 1 to Learning Unit 4, 3, 1, and 2. And you'll get the recording as well after this. And you can always go back to the recording, especially when you're doing your assignment, okay? And please, 3 things. Due date, make sure it's way above that or way before that. Referencing and plagiarism. Those 3 things I need you to just remember, right? If there's no other questions, I'll be seeing you guys. All the best. Good luck with your submission on Monday. I will be looking forward to marking it. And please remember timeframes. Roughly about 7 days after your due date. So I would say by the following week, Monday, Tuesday, I'd say Wednesday latest is when you'll get your results. And then we can do another debrief session for like the first 10 minutes of a live lecture, just so that everybody's on cue. Okay, thank you.